You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor. Today, my guest is Christa Stelzmuller. She is the Chief Technology Officer at Charity Water. And you know that Charity Water is involved in helping people around the world access clean drinking water and water that can be used for various projects. And so I'm excited to have her here, especially given her role as Chief Technology Officer, because I'd love to know how her work in technology is actually helping them achieve their mission and also helping them fundraise. And we've been talking for many weeks now about the challenge in getting everyday donors to support nonprofit organizations. And I'm hoping that Christa can give us some clues based on the work that Charity Water is doing for what other organizations can do to inspire people who are everyday givers. Christa, welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Art. It's nice to be here.
Christa, I want to start out with you giving us a little bit more about the mission and work of Charity Water. It's a pretty household name these days, but I never want to assume that people understand exactly what an organization does. So give us some background.
For sure. Charity Water is an organization that's focused on bringing clean water to those communities who need it. If folks aren't familiar, 10% of the world today lives without basic access to clean water. And that translates to over 700 million people who lack basic access to clean water today. So the number is really large. And we've been focused for about 18 years now on solving the water crisis and making sure that we can bring basic access. And what that really means is making sure that we can bring access that is less than 30 minutes away. I know that probably sounds very foreign to folks who are used to being able to just turn on the tap, but basic access means water that is less than 30 minutes away that is clean and available for communities.
Well, that's a pretty noble undertaking, obviously one that's not easy. But how do you go about delivering clean water? What are some of the projects that you have underway, and how do you go about the work?
So we have many projects underway right now. I would say they're in the thousands, and we work in different countries around the world in order to make this happen. But the way that we normally go about this is we work with local implementation partners on the ground in different regions, and they work very hard to identify those communities that are in most need and that we will have a high rate of success in actually being able to deliver. And so there are teams that go out to assess different communities. There's a whole lot of work that actually goes into building relationships with the communities and developing buy-in around it. And our whole goal is when we build a water project, a water point, is to ensure that it will be sustainable. Charity Water focuses on a minimum of 10 years of making sure that that water point remains functional, and the communities have to be deeply involved in making sure that happens. And so there's a lot of work that goes into identifying who will be the water committee at the community that will be helping to maintain and administer the water project. There's just the overall work that goes in with selecting the correct site and making sure that we're building the right infrastructure. We're pretty solution agnostic today. We'll try to use the right solution for a given community. And so in some cases, it may be a hand pump. In other cases, it may be a piped system of some kind. And in other cases, it could be a biosand filter. It's really depends on the community that we're actually targeting. And then if there's any additional work that needs to go in around making sure that there are the right government approvals in place, et cetera, all of that work goes into the prep for even selecting a water point. And then once the water point is selected, then scheduling and the build out of the construction happens. And then once that is ready to go, and that's always the best moment when a water point comes online and clean water starts flowing for a community. But then there is the follow-on work of making sure that we're monitoring the functionality of that particular water point and ensuring that if anything goes wrong, we're deploying teams to repair it and make sure that we keep it functioning. And so there's any number of reasons why something may go wrong. I think we all know that with infrastructure in general, and that we have to constantly work to maintain it. And so that's kind of the end-to-end process all around.
So you could be doing anywhere, as you've mentioned, from some pipes to wells to actual maybe dams. I don't know if you get that big, but
I don't think, no, we don't get that big today. We don't get that big today, but I do think like different communities around the world have different types of challenges, right?
right,
Some it's
right.
like water access, and in other cases, it's just cleaning the water that becomes
Mm,
important.
yeah.
And so, depending on what the need is, we'll suss out what actually needs to happen there with our local implementation partners.
Well, I love that. Tell me more about local implementation partners.
Certainly, we work with folks who are local to these communities. And so there are a number of additional local NGOs that work in these areas to actually build out the projects. And for us, it's super important to be able to follow that model. One, because it allows us to scale in terms of how we actually solve the problem. But I think you probably know this. It's really important to be able to be working with folks that actually live and work inside of the communities that we're trying to serve. And without that particular model, I don't know that we would have the same level of success or scale that we have today, because these are folks who can tell you in detail exactly what communities are going to be the highest rate of success in terms of being able to do it, and also what the right solutions are and how to navigate all
Mm.
of the elements that need to be navigated when you're building infrastructure for a community. And so it's a core part of our operating model, and one that we think that we take super seriously. It's a key
Yeah.
pillar of how we work.
Well, when we think about water, we just think about, life. You really can't
Right.
survive without it. But there's also extensive benefits that come from a community having water. Have you done any work to really understand how just the access to clean water can transform a community?
Oh, 100%. This is actually so important for us. So I'll share with you a couple things that we talk about. We talk about clean water being one of the sustainable development goals that can impact multiple sustainable development goals. And so when you bring clean water to a community, you're impacting the health of that community, you're impacting the economic opportunity for that community, you're impacting education for that community, and generally, you're also impacting the lives of women and girls in ways that one wouldn't even be able to imagine. When women and girls are having to walk for water hours and hours a day, they miss out on school and they miss out on economic opportunity in ways that might seem surprising to the rest of us. And so when we bring clean water to a community, we're unlocking benefits across health, education, opportunity. It's kind of an amazing transformation that starts to happen. You'll see new businesses start to open side of the community. You'll see attendance in the schools go up, and the incidence of health issues go down. And our team has been tracking a lot of these metrics for quite a long time. And recently, our programs team has also been a part of developing a new set of data points called the HWISE scales, which goes beyond just analyzing the basic WASH metrics around how many people now have access and so on and so forth, but also really digging into what it means to transform a community in ways that are emotional and not just very like these sort of very physical and straightforward metrics that we can measure. I don't think we all, maybe those of us who have access to water every single day, don't necessarily understand the stress that can hold someone down when they're worried about water and they're worried about their health all the time. And so when we're unlocking clean water for a community, it goes to all of those goals that I talked about, but it also goes to the overall sense of well-being that a community can experience and a sense of optimism and positivity about the future, which can change the overall dynamic of an entire group just by not having to worry about your health every single day because by virtue of the access, the level of water that you have access to.
Yeah. Well, again, this may not be a fair question to ask you because you're kind of working in technology and part of the organization's infrastructure. But I'm really interested in knowing if there's a story that you can share with us about a community and how it was able to transform as a result of just having water. Is it fair to ask you that question?
Oh, I wish there is a community in Uganda that our brand team really does talk about because they went back and visited it um, multiple times, and we have the before and after of these communities, and it it was so fascinating to them. And I wish I could give you the exact name right now, but the community when it had just received clean water. And then when they went back a few years later, now there were roads built, there were small stores, there was just a, a community center that had been built out. There was just a different environment that existed as a result of having all of these new water points available in the community. It had just transformed it. I wish I could share the name with you right now, but it was such a beautiful story overall. And there are definitely communities and places like Nepal where we go back and check in, and there are doctors who will tell us that the incident of health issues has reduced to something like only 5 or 6% when they were up much higher than that originally. And so it's, we do go back and we have local storytellers who are on the ground who are checking back in with communities just so that we can try to track and see that progress. And ideally, we do it on a large scale through the new HY scales that we've been developing. And if we are able to measure that, we should be able to start sharing those community stories out, especially with donors on a
Yeah.
larger scale so they can see what it actually means for the community that their dollars may have helped support, what it means for them over time and how things change.
So I want to talk about your work in particular. You're involved with technology, and my goodness, it doesn't take a whole lot of paying attention to see how our world has transformed over the last 2 or 3 decades as a result of technology. And now, with the advent of generative AI, we're seeing another leveling up of technology and its ability to help, or depending on how it's used, to harm humans. I'm really curious about your role and how Charity Water is using technology both to assist with its programs and also, more importantly, maybe importantly too, with its fundraising, because we're seeing a decline as I keep talking to these guests on my show about the importance of getting everyday donors to participate. What is Charity Water doing with technology to increase its fundraising potential and also to drive program success?
Yeah, so let me start with the fundraising and then we'll pop over to program success overall. On the fundraising side, we use technology, I think, in all the ways that one might expect, right? So I won't focus too much there. But if you think about the fact that we are constantly trying to reach users either through our website or through most of our marketing channels, most of those are rooted in technology in some capacity. And a key component for us on that side of the house is we're really active in privacy and compliance and just making sure that we're doing everything in a way that we want to keep our promise of being a good steward to all of our donors overall. And so making sure that we're applying all of our technologies in a way that we're being really cognizant of folks' privacy and treating their dollars as they would expect them to be treated is a big part of what we do. And then we actually have something called the 100% model. And what this means is that when you make a donation, a public donation to Charity Water, 100% of those dollars are going to go to a water project. And we do that through the fact that our operating costs are covered by a private group of donors that are inside of a product that we call the well. And so for us, it's an important pillar to be able to prove that 100% of your dollars are actually going to a water project. And so the way that we use technology today is to be able to actually make sure that throughout the entire life cycle, the journey of your donation, we're able to really tie it back to a water point that you helped contribute on. And through all of that, we're taking in data from our local implementation partners. We're gathering pictures, we're gathering coordinates, and we're making sure that when your donation is matched to a particular project, that we're able to communicate back to the donors at scale on where their donation actually went. And then we're also, so you can imagine this is an enormous amount of data to process overall and then transform in a way that makes sense to the donor. And so we've developed our own algorithms to make sure that we're doing this all in a way that has a great deal of integrity and transparency for our donors. And then we're able to share back with them the details of the community, the actual GPS coordinates. They get pictures of the actual water point. And so all of this is a large technology effort that we anchor in around our transparency. And the 100% model is an important concept for us overall from just an integrity and a fundraising standpoint. And on another sort of innovative front, we're really focused on what it means to build compassion and empathy with communities that live so far away. This is one of the hardest things that we're faced with from a fundraising standpoint, is actually trying to build that connection and help folks understand what it actually means to live in a community that doesn't have clean water. And so we use technology today via in-person experiences. We actually just recently launched something called our Experience Lab. It's a retail location. And there we're using, we have hologram boxes that introduce you to folks that we have met ourselves in various communities. And then we also have a VR experience where we take you through the life of a girl and her mother and what their community was like before. Her name is Grace, and what the life was like before through the moment that the well is created, and then what life is like afterward. And using VR has been super powerful to allow people to be able to connect in a way that we wish we could put everyone on a plane and bring them and allow people to meet each other, because it's so much easier to build compassion and empathy when you actually are able to meet someone in person. But this is our attempt to do this at a larger scale using technology to try to build that compassion and empathy in ways that we think are important to be able to relate to people who need our help.
Fantastic. I do want to comment about the fundraising approach that you take, which is pretty amazing that you're able to find people to fully fund your administrative costs and your fundraising costs. And I just want to point out to people who may be listening that this would not ordinarily necessarily mean that the organization is the most efficient in how it spends those dollars on fundraising and administration. Although I can say in this particular case, in the case of Charity Water, it is very efficient in how it uses its administrative and fundraising expenses. But there are other organizations, for instance, who may not be able to have a particular donor fund those costs, but who are also likewise efficient in how they use their dollars to spend on fundraising and programming. So I just wanted to point that out. And also, with regard to this whole issue of fundraising and administrative costs, what's really important for people to think about is what is the work that the organization is doing with the money, regardless of whether it's categorized as fundraising or administration. I think you've been very fortunate, as I mentioned, to have people who get it. You have a category of donor who truly understands it's important to have administrative and fundraising costs. We can't operate without those costs. We can't
That's
find new
right.
donors. We can't build our organizational infrastructure without administration and fundraising. So kudos to those donors who are willing to stand up and fund those costs. And to all of you who support this organization because you know that your dollars are going to go to a project, I want to encourage you to think more broadly too. This organization could not operate without administrative costs.
That's right.
And while they are being kind to you because you're so kind to them in allowing your dollars to be used in that way, it would not be unfair, in my opinion, for them to use some of your money if you would allow them to for administrative and fundraising costs.
It's so true. And just to build on that point a little bit, it's already so hard to be a nonprofit for those folks
Yep,
who don't know how different how differently nonprofits are regulated from a for-profit
yeah,
company overall. And it really makes it hard for nonprofits to grow because and really at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is grow our impact, right? And the constraints that nonprofits contend with are a real constraint on our ability to grow and have a greater impact. And so Charity Water, yeah, has taken the road of making it even harder on ourselves in this case. And that was primarily due to the fact that there is so little trust today in terms of how well your dollars will be stewarded. And I agree with you completely that the administrative costs are critical. We can't have an impact without those. And so thinking about how we we like to talk about how any dollar that's given in an administrative capacity can transform into $4 of impact, right? And so I understand both sides. And like when we're speaking to different donors, I mean, I've personally heard stories from donors who say because they have so little to give, they want to make sure that their dollars are going to directly to the people that they're intending to be able to help. And I totally get that, right? And so it's one of those things where I understand all of the concerns that are out there today, but I agree with you 100%. We couldn't function without these administrative costs. There's no way we could have an impact. And to choose a very hard, it's a hard road to choose to be a nonprofit to begin with, right? And it's to support nonprofits today does mean putting some trust into them, and because your dollars are going to go make an impact.
indeed. Well, let's talk a little bit more about these holograms and
Oh,
VR
sure.
headsets. I love that. I serve on the board of the Institute for the Future, and we're always looking at what tools institutions can use and people can use in how they live, work, and play. And this seems to be an incredibly thoughtful and innovative way to give people sort of an immersive experience so that they can really appreciate what people are going through in the day of their lives without water. And I'm sure after people have experienced that, they're far more likely to want to give to your organization and want to make a difference with their dollars to helping people get water. So kudos to you all for thinking that way. Are you seeing, I'm imagining as technology continues to give us these kinds of opportunities that you're going to be even more cutting edge in that regard.
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, the immersive experience, you've hit it completely, right? Like we in in the location that we've built, the experience lab, we even have a room built where there is a treadmill and the room is very hot and you can carry a jerry can of water on that if you actually want to experience what a water walk for a young girl in one of these communities is really like, right? And we can't we can't in good conscience include all the dangers that
Right.
come with actually having to make that walk every single day, sometimes twice a day, right? But we can include all of the elements that let you feel what it might be like to actually carry that heavy jerry can of water in 100 degrees of heat and see what that feels like. And so I think it's really about being creative in these ways, right? And speaking to different people in different ways, right? The kids who actually um, come to the lab feel a very different way of connecting, right? They can connect through learning about the different solutions and they can connect through the, we have microscopes there that allow kids to learn what the science of dirty water actually looks like, right?
Mhm.
And so there are different ways to connect with different people and different audiences. And I think we just have to think creatively. And as we go into the future, yeah, we definitely we're looking to take this on the road and be able to scale this model out so that we can actually help folks really, yeah, the goal
Yeah.
is to build compassion.
You know, when my daughter was in the Peace Corps, she was in Guatemala, and I came to visit, and it didn't occur to me that she didn't have water necessarily that she could drink in the place where she lived. And she took me with her to actually access water, and it was a 5 gallon bottle of water. It's kind of the type that you would sit on top of a water cooler, right?
Yeah,
This plastic bottle, and she's only back then she was about 5'3" and 115 pounds, and here she is lugging this, you know, I wouldn't say for miles, but certainly several blocks, of this 5 gallon jug of water. And you can just imagine what that would be like if you had to carry it for a mile, or you say within 30 minutes. That's,
right.
quite a trek that people have to take just to access water. And so I completely get it. And for those of you who are just experiencing this for the first time, you can kind of see how compelling the work is that Charity Water is doing. I also wanted to just ask this. It's kind of interesting to me that while water is fundamental to life, as we said before, you all have really stuck to your mission. You haven't really strayed away from just water. And I'm sure there are lots of temptations for you to do collateral kinds of work. What is it that has kept you so close to this singular mission?
I mean, I think if I'm going to give credit to a single individual, Scott Harrison, our founder, is dedicated to solving this crisis
Mhm.
in our lifetimes. And he saw firsthand the issues that came. He worked on mercy ships for a while, and
Mhm.
he saw firsthand the issues that came from health-borne diseases with lack of access to clean water. And it was a transformative moment for him in his life. And he's been laser focused on making sure that we're actually able to solve this in our lifetimes because this is a solvable problem. This is not one of those intractable problems that we aren't going to be able to address, or that feel so overwhelming that they feel beyond our ability to reach the end. This is completely solvable. We have the solutions today. We know how to get it done. And it really is about funding and infrastructure in order to get it done, and the ongoing sense of trust that needs to happen in order to make that happen. And so that is what I think keeps us laser focused on it, because until it's done, it's not done, but it's achievable. And because it's achievable, there's no reason to get off this path until we actually hit the end.
Well, Christa, I want to really thank you for joining me on this show. I I really think you've given us some things to think about, both from a technological standpoint and from a human standpoint, when it comes to making sure that people have water. And I want to just wish you and the team at Charity Water continued success in your approaches, in your fundraising, so that you can indeed solve this problem, which, as you say, is indeed solvable. Now, for all of you who are listening to this podcast for the first time, this is the Heart of Giving podcast. We're a weekly show. Every Tuesday, there's a new episode. I hope you will subscribe so that you can get it on audio on all major podcast platforms. And you can subscribe to the BBB Wise Giving Alliance's YouTube page to get all of the video content related to these podcasts each week as they come out as well. So I want to thank you all for listening, and we'll see you back here next week.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.